All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the 2023 office hours. This is our first one of the season, so I know it's good to see some of you in the room, so thank you very much. A couple reminders about today just to make things successful. All attendees are on mute right now, and we are keeping you on mute unless you raise your hand for a question. We ask that you send your questions through voice as opposed to the chat, since we're not going to be monitoring the chat today, so please keep that in mind. We hope that all your questions will be addressed by the presenters during this session. Also, for any of you any colleagues that haven't been able to make it today, it's being recorded and will be posted to the trainings page on the CSDE assessment website. So again, welcome office hours. This is for our Smarter Balanced, NGSS, and the Alternate Assessment System tests. We've been doing this for many years, and we're glad to be back again. I'm joined by my colleagues presenting today: Deirdre Ducharme, Janet Stuck, Ada Kovaci-Kume, Jen Cho, and Christy Alberino, excuse me. And I know also a couple colleagues from the office, Jeff Gregg and Michelle Rosado, are here on as well. So if we need them, we can pull them into the teams as well. So enough of that. Here's our contact information for any of us on the call. Also, I have included, actually everybody is here. Also included is our general assessment inbox email, which is the CT student assessment at ct.gov email. Also on the team from Cambium, Jen Cho, Marie Musumeci, and Christine June here. Here's their help desk contact information, email, and number. You shouldn't know this by now. This is probably well already programmed in your phone. So office hours, what are the details? Again, every Thursday from now till the beginning of June at 3 p.m. We sent an invite last week to all district administrators. Feel free to forward that invite to relevant staff. Anybody can drop into this, really, and this is optional. You don't have to come to this, obviously, but there are a lot of nuggets you learn. There's a lot of folks who come back week after week. In particular, we have a lot to say today, so please get your note pencil out and get ready to go. We have a lot to communicate. So what's the overview look like? We just have some general updates, then a calendar for special considerations, participation reminders, our favorite topic of the day, PSIS and CT-SEDS, some prep reminders, accessibility reminders, then some reminders about special documented accommodations, and then finally the alternate assessment system. So just a little bit on what's been going on the last week or so. We started testing, obviously, and already we've completed about 3,000 tests for Smarter, 5,000 tests for NGSS. Keep in mind we started NGSS at the beginning of February, so they did have a little bit of a head start. And then that KELP number there actually should be divided by 4, really, to get the number of students. That's really the subtest completed. So we're doing pretty well. We've started off with a bang here on our most wonderful time of the year, the testing season. So some other important reminders. Again, most of the stuff you should know as DAs or coordinators in your district. All materials have been posted to the comprehensive portal. The link is here. That's Christy had dropped into the chat, and you can link right to it. All TAMs and TCMs were delivered in late January. If you didn't receive enough, feel free to call the Cambium Help Desk, 844-202-7583. They can help you out. You can also send us an email if you need them. Testing window runs until June 2nd this year. One other sort of very helpful piece of material that we released subsequent to our DA trainings in January. There is a test administrator training that you all had asked for very frequently over the last couple of years. So off this link here, you can find that training. Preliminary results, just like we did last year, we will be providing rolling release of results in the centralized reporting system. It really is dependent on a quality control process, so we haven't set a hard date, but it will likely happen sometime in May. but just like last year, you will see results rolling into the reporting system shortly after taking the tests. And then, of course, all results will be posted by mid-June in the CRS. And then there's some links to some brochures for monitoring testing here that, I know it's not that time of year quite yet, but it comes quickly, and before we know it, it's the end of May, and you're going to be looking for this stuff, and there's some great resources here. Okay, so far, I think we're off to a good start based on time, so I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre and Janet for the next portion of our presentation. Deirdre, Janet.
Great, thanks, Abe. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'd like to take some time to walk you through the next few slides related to Smarter Balance and NGSS assessments, as well as our alternate assessments. And as a reminder, there are some critical dates for you to keep in mind as you're preparing for testing. So for starters, you want to make sure that for any student that is eligible for a designated support, this includes your general ed students and your EL, ML students that may require language supports. You want to make sure that those test settings are activated on your student's TIDE dashboard. And that may happen in a number of ways, but the takeaway is that those test supports are activated before your student actually starts testing. We really want to minimize the amount of irregularities and test issues that may occur if your students don't have the accurate test supports. And for special documented accommodations, for those students whose needs are not met through the standard accommodations through the test delivery interface, we have a specific process for requesting those accommodations. So make sure that if you haven't requested a petition, that you contact our office as soon as possible. If you have students that are approved for special documented accommodations in an implemented active IEP 504 in CT-SEDS, then those accommodations will automatically sync with the TIDE system, and there are no further steps that you'll need to take as far as getting those accommodations into TIDE. And then for medical exemptions, I recommend that you refer to Appendix B in the assessment guidelines. We have some specific deadlines that are assessment specific. Medical exemptions are only available to those students that have a severe medical emergency that prevents them from receiving instruction either in a hospital or at home. These are kids that are not able to receive any kind of instructional services. So if you think you have a student that qualifies, please contact our office and we'll work with you as far as getting a petition. There's some PSIS reminders. Every once in a while, we get a call about like who should participate in statewide testing. We have foreign exchange students that are with us for the school year. Do they need a test, et cetera? And really the takeaway is that if you have a student that's registered in PSIS, then that student participates in statewide testing. So we want to make sure that you work with your PSIS coordinators to make sure that your student demographics are accurately represented in PSIS, because that data is used for reporting and accountability. So take some time to look at the variables that we've indicated on this slide to make sure that they're represented on your students in your student's registration file, if applicable. We want to make sure that the student demographic values are updated and reflected for this test window. We're going to be pulling that data on June 2nd of 2023. Students will participate in the assessment based on the grade that in which they're enrolled. So again, if you have 11th graders, students in grade 10, 11, that might be on the cusp of moving up a grade based on number of credits. You want to, again, make an appropriate determination and then have their grade accurately reflected in PSIS. Otherwise, if they're listed as an 11th grader, they do have to participate in testing. The other thing to think about with PSIS is we want to drive home that accommodations are only available for those students where it's indicated in PSIS that they are special ed or section 504. So whether you're manually setting accommodations in TIDE or wondering why a sync between CT-SEDS may not be in effect, a good starting place is to look at their 504 and IDEA indicator. Which brings us to the next slide, CT-SEDS and TIDE. We finally have been able to sync our accommodation data from implemented active IEP and 504 plans from CT-SEDS into TIDE. This went into effect last week, and there are a few bumps in the road that we're working on, but for the most part, the sync has been quite successful. So for any of those finalized IEPs up through last Monday, those accommodations should currently be reflected on your student's TIDE dashboard. I had already mentioned the fact that we want to make sure that the IDEA 504 indicator is turned on in PSIS, because that data does sync with TIDE nightly as well. So even if there might be a mismatch between what's indicated in CT-SEDS as far as IDEA or 504 status in PSIS, we also want to drive home that PSIS is critical to make sure that it's updated to reflect those kids who may have finalized IEP and 504 plans in CT-SEDS. Another takeaway is that, again, this is just specific for this slide is specific for CT-SEDS in the fact that if you are using IEP Direct, or if your IEP 504 plans live in a different place, some of these details may not apply to you. But so just bear with me. At the moment, as far as the IEP goes, CT-SEDS, and any IEP for that matter, is the source of truth. So regardless of what you may think needs to be in TIDE or not, the rule of thumb is to always go back to the student's IEP 504 plan. If there are changes regarding a student's designated supports or accommodations, they have to be documented through an implemented or active IEP or IEP amendment. Do not apply any changes in TIDE manually. So again, this is just for those records in CT-SEDS. Our recommendation is that the amendments, changes, what have you, must be made in CT-SEDS, and then allow those changes to sync to TIDE. Once the amendment is implemented or active, any new accommodations will sync with the TIDE system. So this happens nightly or daily rather, so you should expect to see any new changes in TIDE. With that said, we want, if you're finding that the accommodations aren't syncing, you might want to look at what the implementation date is for the IEP in CT-SEDS. So if it turns out that the implementation date is not listed until next week, then you shouldn't expect to see those accommodations sync with TIDE until that date is in effect. If the amended revised IEP or 504 indicates the removal of a designated support or accommodation in CT-SEDS, it will not be automatically removed in TIDE. And this is true for this school year. Therefore, it is recommended that our district administrators or district coordinators remove them from the student's profile. Now, we have some further guidance about this on the next slide. But before we move to the next slide, when we think about removals, there may be an instant where based on the student's IEP or 504, that you have to remove a special documented accommodation. And an example of this is a read aloud, scribe, math manipulatives, for instance. So these accommodations can only be deactivated by the State Department of Education or Cambium. So please contact either me or Janet. Provide us the student's SACID, no names please, and the accommodation type, and then we'll work with ADA and our CT-SEDS liaison to double check the student's IEP before making any final adjustments on your student's TIDE dashboard. So I know there's a lot of information that I've covered. Please go back to refer to this slide if you have additional questions. And just a few more thoughts about CT-SEDS is that if you identify accommodation discrepancies within an implemented active IEP or 504 plan in CT-SEDS and TIDE, please let us know. So again, whether you're making changes or not, if you're finding discrepancies, please contact us, provide us the SACID, the accommodation type, or whatever the scenario is, and we will work behind the scenes to see if we can diagnose the issue. It is recommended that districts develop a local process for reviewing, tracking, and updating discrepancies in CT-SEDS and TIDE. I know this is a big year, a lot of change. There are so many moving pieces, and our district administrators are doing a phenomenal job as far as working with their staff and case managers to make sure that the accommodations are accurately represented. So we appreciate your hard work, but we do recommend that you take some time to come up with a plan so that you can track any issues that may come up. We've also included a link to the CT-SEDS FAQ, and this is, we have some nuts and bolts about what that sync looks like and some common questions that might come up between the sync process with CT-SEDS and TIDE. Some participation reminders. I already mentioned that students enrolled in the Connecticut Public Schools in grades 3 through 8 and 11 will participate in statewide academic assessments. That might include Smarter Balanced, Math and ELA, perhaps the alternate assessments for Math, ELA, and of course, our science assessments for students enrolled in grades 5, 8, and 11. We do require testing for students that are enrolled in approved private special education programs and students in PSIS that are educated in out-of-state facilities. If you refer to the link on this slide, the students in PSIS who attend out-of-state and in-state non-approved facilities brochure, we provide specific steps as far as how you collect the test material or order test material for those students that may be outplaced. And these guidelines are assessment specific. So if you have students that are participating in the standard or alternate assessments, there are different processes that you will follow. And if you have questions about this, please give us a call. And finally, we've included links to all of the critical resources that your teachers and appropriate staff should have access to. All of our manuals are posted to our portal and the CSDE website, but we've included links here for easy access. It's critical that your test proctors are using the test administration manuals at the time of testing, but that they also take time to review them before and after testing, because there are a lot of organizational features that need to be in place, leading up to test administration and then following testing. We've included the CTAA user guide. This is not a new resource, but we recently posted updates for this year. And we also have the alternate assessment manuals that are available to your staff. And the next slide includes some specifics about the purposes for each of the alternate assessment test administration manuals, as well as some training that is available specifically for those individuals who are administering alternate assessments. For some preparation reminders, again, the information on the slide is really nothing new. We just want our district administrators to encourage staff involved with test preparation and setup to really be mindful about providing students with the best testing outcomes. So think about the classroom or the testing environment and making sure that it's conducive to all students, minimizing distractions and noises and things like that, but also making sure that if you have students that need the provision of non-embedded designated supports or features that they're entitled to, that those considerations are put in place before testing. If you need to order paper materials such as large print or test booklets, make sure that you as a DA order those materials online through the TIDE system. And then you're also selecting the large print or Braille accommodations on your student's TIDE dashboard. Those two pieces are really important to have in place. If you have students that are using assistive technology, you want to make sure that you're working with your technology coordinator in advance to testing. And you want to try out the test functionality on a practice test or maybe an interim before the student actually begins the Smarter Balanced or NGSS, alternate assessments, et cetera. And as a reminder for those kiddos that are using assistive technology, make sure that you set the permissive mode in TIDE. We've included a link to the technology guide that will help coordinators with those scenarios regarding maybe text-to-speech, software, voice packs, assistive technology as well. So keep in mind that we have a technology guide available on the portal. I already mentioned the value of working with case managers and other special ed staff, even your ELML educators, to make sure that students have the appropriate supports in place at the time of testing. That was a lot of information we shared, and there's still more to come. So are there any questions at this point? Looking in the chat, but if you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand, and we'll call on you.
As a reminder too, we're asking that as folks use this tact since we aren't monitoring the chat for question answering on today's webinar.
Okay, I don't see any, so I'm going to keep plowing along here. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is our accessibility chart, and it will populate. This is probably familiar to most of you, but I just want to remind you that it's out there and can support PPT decisions. Again, if you look at the key at the bottom, it'll call your attention to things that are not available for certain assessments and then require training for those items that are special documented accommodations. And I also wanted to point out, as Deirdre said earlier, those non-embedded items are district provided. So you want to make sure that you're providing those ahead of time, have them all set to go for the particular students who need them. Okay, next slide. And these I'm going to go through a little bit quickly because I do want to attend to our time. Many of these accommodations have already been discussed and shared in the district administrator workshop, and I believe it's also in the test administrator training, which is available in the training webpage that Abe mentioned in the initial slides. So in terms of text to speech, those students that have this accommodation, you need to make sure they're familiar with how to access this and turn it on when they're eligible for this. And the students will need headsets unless they're tested in a one-to-one setting. You can also try this out in the practice site. So we have text-to-speech and other English learner supports. And on this slide, we've included a lot of resources for you for your English learners, or even those kids whose language are not available within the testing platform. We have the illustrated dictionary, illustrated glossary, and we want to make sure that they have access to this. The text to speech is available in English, and it's also available in Spanish. Speech to text, this is where the student voices their response and it's printed into the appropriate text box within the system. Again, students should be familiar with this process, using it during instruction, and they need to be familiar with how to access this within the test. The practice site is a really good way to work through this with them. So with the speech to text, there's a microphone icon that should appear within the student's testing platform. If it's not there and you expect it to be there, then you need to go back to the student's profile to make sure that it was set properly within TIDE system. We wanted to talk a little bit about, I think this is still me, right? About special documented accommodations. These are the non-standard accommodations above and beyond those provided within our accessibility chart, documented in our accessibility guidelines. These are described in the accessibility guidelines, but we just wanted to touch on this because these are have more guidelines and requirements when they're provided to the student because they are outside the standard accommodations and impacts the interpretation of the student's scores. So when we're talking about CT-SEDS, these are now, for the most part, available to you to select in CT-SEDS and requires attestation within CT-SEDS. Print on demand and customized accommodations still need to be petitioned to Deidre or myself, and we work through that process with the district administrator. So in reviewing initial reports from CT-SEDS, Deidre and I noticed that several of the special documented accommodations in CT-SEDS have been selected. Now we realize that this is a growing process, so that particular report at the time that we looked at it may not be quite accurate. But we want to caution you that now that it can be selected in CT-SEDS, you have to remember that these accommodations, for the most part, must be provided individually to the student, because we're seeing an abundance of selections of these accommodations, like read aloud or scribe. These are provided individually to the student, and the student should be using it in instruction regularly. So we want to make sure that you're looking at these features within the PPT team decision making so that they're not selected in error. So with most of these special documented accommodations also require additional guidelines or documentation that needs to be completed to finalize that process. So I believe it's the next slide. Shows some of these right here. So if you are selecting a scribe and have attested to the fact that the student is using a scribe regularly in instruction and requires that support in CT-SEDS, that's fine. But you need to remember that you need to access the scribe protocol, complete it, and maintain that locally. Similarly, the human signer has other guidelines. Math manipulatives, please access the brochure because it describes requirements for the administration of that accommodation as well. So please familiarize yourself with this and certainly share this with your PPT teams so they understand the significance of selecting a special documented accommodation within CT-SEDS. Some additional accommodation reminders. Now that we're working with CT-SEDS, it's becoming evident that sometimes the PPT team is selecting accommodations that are conflicting. So for example, if a child is accessing embedded text-to-speech, they also select non-embedded read aloud. So if the child is sitting down, how are they accessing the items? Is it being read to them via the system, or is a separate person reading to them? Because remember, if you're administering a read aloud, that requires another person and an individualized setting. So as you're making these decisions, you need to think about the actual testing scenario and how that impacts planning. And we often have questions about the calculator, and I just wanted to clarify. The specialized calculator is an accommodation for students who require a Braille or a talking calculator, whereas the handheld calculator, which is a special documented accommodation, depending on the grade, and again, these are only for grades 6 through 8 in math or science. These are require that in grade 6, it's a basic calculator, whereas in grade 7 and 8, it is a scientific calculator. And this is described in our assessment guidelines. So you want to make sure that you differentiate that. And it can also only be provided in segment 1 of the math assessment. And so we want to make sure that the proctors are aware of that and they don't invalidate the administration of other assessment pieces. Any questions so far? I can't hear you, Abe.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, I was just saying, if as a reminder, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute your mic if you want to ask your question. Keep in mind too that just 2 points. Some of these, the points that Janet and Deirdre have been touching on the last couple slides are really late breaking news and extremely important. So we encourage you to, take a look at these slides in your time when you can look at them. You have a little more time to digest them. That's the first thing. And then the next thing is we will actually be posting the PowerPoint as well if you need the PowerPoint on our training site. And we know we're up against the 30-minute allotment for this meeting. Originally, we knew we were going to get into that today, so we hope that you'll stay with us for a few more minutes. We have a handful more slides to go through.
Okay, I think Deirdre is going to continue with the next section.
That's right. Thanks, Janet. And thanks again for staying a little bit longer. The last segment here pertains to the alternate assessments, and I do have some nuggets related to the early stopping rules. So if you think that these slides apply to your work, then please stay on. I want to walk through just some details related to preparing for the Connecticut Alternate Assessments, which of course align with the testing window for Smarter Balanced. And we have some specific dates for you to keep in mind when planning for your alternate assessments. As you know, you've been more than likely working with your trained TEAs to have your students' eligibility forms submitted through the DEI. We're still getting a lot of calls and emails from teachers wondering why their kids can't access their tests. And if this is the case, more than likely it's because the eligibility form has not yet been submitted in the DEI. So as a reminder, just if you're encountering this issue for a particular student, make sure your teacher double checks their submission and to make sure that eligibility form went through the data entry interface. For any late entries, our teachers need to, or locally, you as a district administrator can follow up with the Connecticut Help Desk and let them know that the eligibility form was submitted, but you need the student's alt flag indicator turned on. That indicator is located on your student's TIE dashboard, and that's what gives your students access to the alternate assessments on the test menu available in their secure browser. So we want to make sure your students are taking the right test. We do not want kids within this population taking standard assessments simply because they didn't have either the form or the alt flag turned on. So just keep in mind these dates. Another critical date is related to those students in grades 5, 8, and 11 that are taking the alternate science assessment. Teachers need to submit their students' scores into the data entry interface. So after all the performance tasks are administered, the final piece is just to transcribe those student responses, those scores into the data entry interface. And the window for that closes on June 2nd. I mentioned the data entry interface. This is a system that serves multiple purposes. We've included a brochure, so if you do have a new staff person that's assigned to assigned the role for submitting information in the DEI, please share the resource with them. The data entry interface serves as a platform for submitting your eligibility forms for the alternate assessments, the science student score worksheets, but also if you have students that are taking their Smarter Balanced or science assessments using Braille or large print test booklets, those students' scores need to be transcribed into the data entry interface. If that doesn't happen, then we're unable to score and give your students reports for their hard work. So please get those results, those tests submitted by June 2nd. Next slide. For the alternate assessments, specifically math and English language arts, our trained TEAs are using a multiple set of documents. They're referring to their CTAA test administration manual, but they also need to log into TIDE, either through the Secure Materials tab or Secure Inbox, to download the directions for test administration. These directions are grade and content specific, so teachers will essentially download 2 for each of their individual students, the math and ELA. And these are materials that include script. So the teachers are going to be following along and delivering the directions and some of the scoring procedures or administration procedures as documented in these directions. So it's critical that your teachers download this material in advance to testing. The material is secure, so make sure that after test administration, your teachers do shred the material in a secure fashion. And for students who are unable to participate in the alternate assessments using a computer, perhaps they would benefit from the paper pencil assessments. And again, kids are not within this population, children are not accessing these assessments independently. They are working in close conjunction with their test administrator. But the secure test materials for math and ELA are also available in the secure materials folder.
Yep, those are actually PDFs so that the teacher can download those. And if, for example, a student's using an eye gaze board, they can cut up the items and place them appropriately on the eye gaze board.
Great, thanks, Janet. We implemented a new process this year for the early stopping rule, and this is a process that addresses a communication issue for a small group of students that have some of the most significant cognitive and adaptive behavioral needs, reported by teachers. So these are students that have no observable way to communicate responses and participate in the classroom, and in effect on large-scale assessments. So as part of this new process, we created a new early stopping rule that involves a student response check. And so the document on this slide, it's hyperlinked. If perhaps, hopefully you're familiar with it, because we did provide information about this, not only in the assessment guidelines, but also in our assessment newsletter rather, but we also covered this during our district administrator training back in January. But the student response check actually allows the teacher to administer 3 trials to a student in advance of testing. We had a deadline of March 1st, but essentially the student response check allows the teacher to determine whether the student is able to provide a form of communication or response, to then determine whether the student participates in testing or not. So if in fact there is a situation where your teacher hasn't submitted the early stopping rule attestation form to you, or maybe you as a district administrator still have this form and haven't submitted it through TIDE, please let us know if you need guidance or support in how to submit the form. But essentially, Janet and I have been processing early stopping rule requests through just up through this past week. And what essentially we're doing is, for those students that are approved for the early stopping rule, Cambium is applying a code. Abe, if you move to the next slide, we can actually, it's the slide after this next one here. Cambium assessments will apply a participation code of 102 for those approved early stopping rule cases. So again, small group of students that qualify for this. We had a process in place in which we requested that the early stopping rule student response checks be administered by teachers through February 1st and then submitted to their district administrators for submission to our office. So just to confirm, for students that have this participation code of 102, they will count as participant for accountability, but they will be categorized in the below basic performance category for reporting. These students will not take the alternate assessments because essentially they've received this approval for an early stopping rule. And qualifications, or approval rather, for the early stopping rule applies to the KELP, the CTAA, and the alternate science.
So if you have a student that was approved at the time of the KELP administration, then those teachers who may be different administering CTA and CTAS need to make sure they're aware of that, because those tests won't be available for those teachers.
Right, and the goal is for the early stopping rule is we wanted to give teachers an opportunity to identify these students before the testing window, so that we could identify, code them, and then allow for these students to not have to participate in the actual assessments this spring. So if you have questions about this, give us a call or send us an email. And then finally, this last slide, please share it with any staff or teachers that will support the administration of alternate assessments. Janet and I included a lot of resources. My two favorites are the TAA responsibility checklist, and it really gives teachers like an overall guideline as far as the tasks that they should be doing before, during, and after testing. And then we've also included some specialized resources for those students who are blind, deaf, or deafblind. So use these resources with your staff and students as appropriate. And as always, if you have questions, you know where to find us. Please reach out. Abe, I'm passing it back to you.
Thanks, Dee. So thank you, Dee. Thank you, Janet. It's all awesome information. We are at the end of our slide deck, so we want to say thank you, but also offer one more opportunity to hear any questions. If you want to raise your hand, we'll unmute you. Even if you want to say hi too, that would be great as well. So we'll give it a moment here. I also, in the interim, posted, some of you might be interested in the PowerPoint version of this. We'll probably get that posted on that site in the chat. Probably tomorrow we'll have that up for you if you need it. Okay, well, seeing and hearing no questions, I think we're all set for today. Again, thanks to my colleagues for helping out at CSDE as well as at CAI. We will see you next week. Have a good evening, and thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.